close quarters, but we'll use the mics just because I know we have some people who might be listening in online. But I'll hand it over to Jason to say a few words.
Yeah, I'll kick it off and then hand it back over to you. Yeah, so excited to have everybody out here. This is part of our Startup Spring Week by Prepare for VC, and came together with a lot of great communities around the Boston ecosystem for a really fun week of startup events surrounding the TechCrunch conference that's happening on Thursday. So yeah, we're also live streaming all of our events through SQL that's available on the Prepare for VC website, and then sharing across the Boston New Technology and Startup Grind Boston communities as well. And yeah, excited to have everybody out here. Kicked off yesterday with a virtual event and a Twitter Spaces. We had an event over at District Hall this morning, and then we'll be at Venture Cafe in Cambridge tomorrow with a startup showcase and our demo day from our accelerator program. So yeah, everybody that came out, we'll send out a follow-up email tonight or by tomorrow morning too with the next round of events for the week. And yeah, we're gonna keep this, I have a great panel we've assembled from a lot of the great community leaders around Boston with Madison, Kylie, Dan, and Rachel, and really excited for them to kind of share their story. And the theme of the chat is it takes a village and voice of community leadership. So we're going to be talking all about community tonight, and also keep it interactive with any questions from the audience here, and I'll monitor the virtual chat as well for additional questions. But yeah, excited. I'll hand it over to Madison to kick us off.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Welcome, everyone. How many of you all, is this your first time in the MassChallenge space? We have some folks. Oh, wow. Amazing. Well, welcome, truly. My name is Madison Sowards. I'm the Senior Community Manager at MassChallenge. It's actually somewhat of a new location. We opened it about a year ago, courtesy of MassMutual, who donated the space to us. MassChallenge is a nonprofit organization, and we accelerate early-stage entrepreneurs to disrupt the status quo and create meaningful global change. We started here in 2009, actually quite literally a block away. We went over to Innovation Design Building for a bit, and now we're back here, back to home base. We started here in 2009, but we have expanded into 8 other locations around the world, really becoming this global network for entrepreneurs. Our model is at no equity and no cost for entrepreneurs. We really abide by this community-driven model for all of our accelerator operations. So I'm excited to dive into a little bit about that and what it means to be part of a community. And I love the term innovation ecosystem. I think we probably all do. It's one of those really fun buzzwords. But today we've got a really awesome group to kind of dive into what does that actually mean? What does that actually look like? How do you tap into that? So I want to give everyone the chance to introduce yourselves. I figure we'll probably be pretty conversational. We'll chat a bit and then we'll chat with you all. So Kylie, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kylie Bourjaily. I am a 2-time founder. 3 times if you include InnoCrew, which is the founder community that I run here in Boston, which I'm sure we'll get to in a little bit. But yeah, super happy to be here and chat all things community.
Hello everyone, my name is Dan Newman, and today I am representing Startup Boston, which enables access to all the different corners of the Boston startup ecosystem. I'm also excited to talk about ways to connect and get engaged and learn and grow.
Hello, my name is Rachel McIntosh. I'm the community manager at Venture Lanes. We're located in downtown Boston, and we work with early stage B2B SaaS startups in a myriad of different ways I'm sure we'll cover. But to round it out, I'm equally excited to be here.
We're all excited. Before we dive into it, I want to get a good sense of who we have here, at least in person. I know we've got some people virtually, but who here is a founder? Okay. Who here is interested in innovation, but is not quite a founder, but maybe might be thinking about being a founder or an entrepreneur someday? How many investors do we have in the room? Okay. How many operators, enablers that really want to support entrepreneurs across the landscape? Okay, great. So you got a pretty good mix. Just wanted to make sure we had a great representation here of our community, because when we talk about community, we talk about who really makes up this idea of community. That's who we're talking about. And so Kylie, we'll start kind of with you a little bit more about how do you view the concept of community coming from being a founder yourself and really integrating within this innovation world and now creating a forum for entrepreneurs and founders to connect?
Yeah, I think for me, community is really just people that you can rely on, whether that is somebody who has been through what you have been through, somebody who, I don't know, is in the same place as you. So the community that I run, InnoCrew, for us, it's really just about getting together and bonding over similar experiences. A lot of people are early stage founders, and yeah, we just have a nice time, we chill, and lean on each other when we need help.
Do you want to explain for everyone what InnoCrew is and does and what that looks like?
Yeah, so I started InnoCrew, which, like I had mentioned earlier, is a community for founders here in Boston. Because to put it bluntly, I was super lonely throughout my founder journey and needed people to hang out with and rely on and ask questions to, and just kind of figure out a lot of the hard stuff that nobody really talks about, like mental health and loneliness and isolation, especially if you're a solo founder, which I know many of you in this room are. You have probably experienced that. And so, long story short, I put on Twitter that I wanted to meet more founders in Boston, and 7 people met me for lunch at Italy, and this was in November of 2021. And since then, I began hosting a dinner in my apartment for about 20 founders in mind. A few of you guys come to it, and that's what I like to call the foundation of the organization. And recently, we've started to expand and diversify the types of events that we do, but it really, like I said, like we just hang out in my apartment and eat good food and talk about founder life. But I mean, in addition to that too, like people have found their co-founders and mentors and just people, like I said, to lean on. Like that to me is like the essence of community. It's just people to lean on.
Yeah, and I think that there's this really powerful thing that happens when you bring people together, especially over food and drinks and fun times, that doesn't always happen when you're not in person and not able to engage directly. And we've seen that even in the pandemic and that shift and going in between the hybrid and the in-person. And Dan, I know you've seen this on a different scale with Startup Boston being a really large organization that came about before the pandemic. It came about to create the sense of community and resources for founders in a really similar spirit as InnoCrew. And you all had to do that pivot to in-person and virtual, and those are a lot of questions all at once. So let's start with just why did Startup Boston come about? How did it come about, and what was that transition like?
Absolutely. So the founder of Startup Boston, Steph Rulick, she had basically the same recognition. It's how do you find your people? How do you find places? How do you find access? How do you find the investors? How do you grow when maybe you just don't have the network that everyone else may have? So she said, well, I'll build my own. So she has. So that was 7 years ago. And so what Startup Boston has grown into is a full-on organization completely staffed by volunteers, which is also part of the magic, that runs a big conference in the fall, as well as a variety of different events throughout the year, just to create and curate the spaces for people to find their place. And the magic of that is that there's a lot of people out there that are looking for a place. And if you're looking for a place, there's probably a place, or at least somebody who's looking for it too. And just building those connections, that's, I think, the magic behind Startup Boston.
And is there a big announcement today?
There is, hashtag SBW 2023. We actually just opened up registration for Startup Boston Week this fall, September 11th through 15th at the Sawyer Business School, Suffolk University, right downtown Boston, right on Tremont. We're gonna be using the gorgeous spaces that are featured in like The Departed and all these famous movies. And it's incredible that we get to have this one huge space that we're just gonna run amok in. So make sure to register hashtag SBW 2023.
You're not registered yet.
Yeah,
Right after this panel,
it's
not yet.
free, so you might as well.
And Rachel, you are a volunteer for Startup Boston, but you also have a huge role to play in the ecosystem and building community through venturing. You want to tell us a little bit about what venturing does and the spirit of community, maybe Blue Hour ago?
Yes. So like I said, MassChallenge works with early stage B2B software companies, and we do that in a myriad of ways. We have a physical office located in downtown Boston, and within the 10,000 square feet that we occupy, we actually have 55 early stage B2B SaaS companies that work out of our space in a different amalgamation relative to every company. So it could be 12 people in a private office. It might be one person representing one company on a hybrid desk. So there's sort of like a membership that fits everyone and sort of what their working style is. And the physical space was sort of the first thing that VentureLane ever opened. And it was really exciting. There was a bunch of momentum. We loved the community that we were seeing built there. But the fact of the matter is it's not always feasible geographically, economically, whatever the case may be, for folks to pay for a membership to a space. And we had so many resources that we wanted to make sure that we weren't sort of gatekeeping those or limiting folks from being able to access that. So what was born out and bred of that was sort of a Slack community that we operate that has a global presence, which is really awesome. VentureLane's founder, Christian Makel, grew up in Munich, lived in Australia for a time. Brian Denmark, who partners with us on our accelerator programs we run, lived in Asia and Australia actually as well for a time. So it's a pretty global audience, which is amazing because there's 2,000 folks in there. They all have that B2B experience. And it's sort of this community where people aren't afraid to ask questions. People are willing to kind of give one another feedback, plug in, make introductions. We have a perks package where folks are saving like close to $1 million on software. When you're at the early stage, don't spend money you don't have to. So it's this idea of how do we bring all of these resources together and make sure that everyone is able to access that. So that SAP community was sort of born and bred out of that need. And then actually, as of January of last year, we launched VentureLane Studio, which is our in-house accelerator program. So we're working with early stage B2B SaaS companies, very small cohorts by design, because one of the things with us is we really believe that there's magic in that one-to-one in-person time. And we wanted to make sure that that was something that we could continue even through the accelerator model. So our cohorts are quite small, could be anywhere between 2 and 6 companies at the most. And it's been really, really special to kind of see those companies grow and scale, and we're able to invest up to $100,000 into each of them, which is just another way that we found that we were able to add a layer of support. So that's kind of what VentureLane is in its totality.
Awesome, I love it. I think when we start to think about this idea of community and this it takes a village concept, it does take a village. It takes all these different organizations coming together in different capacities to really support entrepreneurs. And I know MassChallenge was really built off this idea, which is why we started here in Boston in the first place. We wanted a place and a forum for innovation to thrive, especially in 2009 in the recession. People were turning to entrepreneurship as a means for innovating and for new business and economic development too. But we still sometimes get the question of, well, why Boston? Why don't I go to New York or San Francisco or all these other places where innovation is really known to be thriving? So I'm curious for anyone who wants to kick us off on that about why Boston? What makes the community here so unique in our little village?
I can take a stab at it. So as someone that's still relatively new to Boston, I moved here in September of 2021, and I moved here not knowing anyone whatsoever. And I think one of the things that I've kind of grown to love and appreciate about Boston has been something that I've experienced. And it's that you can come here without a network of people, without all these connections. And if you look around, there are people left and right that want to invest in you, that want to help you, that want to see you grow. And I think geographically, we're in this really interesting position where, we're very close to a lot of states in the area. Physically here, we have so much proximity to incredible universities, some of the best in the world, and that brings this diversity in perspective and in talent and in life experience. And when you're seeing all of these people kind of congregate, that's something that very few other places can boast, that they have all of these attributes. And there's this sort of palpable spirit in Boston of pride of, we want things built here, we want to see them scale here, and there's this sense of being a Bostonian. And I don't know if I can consider myself one because I've only been here for just over a year, but I feel that. And I think sometimes there's this perception that Northeast as a whole, that people are kind of heads down, very busy, don't have time. And that's not been my experience at all. Anyone that I've talked to has been so warm, so kind, so willing to help. And I think that that's something when you're building here, when you're visiting, that's feedback that I constantly get. And it's not to say that other areas don't have that, but sort of that cocktail of all of those components, I think comes together in a really magical way for us.
I would like to give a different perspective because while I agree with everything that Rachel is saying, I think that that's not the case for everybody. And in terms of like coming here and being almost immediately aware and accepted into the community, particularly like if you did not go to school here or if you just don't know where to look, it can be very, very difficult to break into the Boston startup scene. And that was my experience because I moved to Boston 7 years ago. I was 19. I did not come here for school. I, at the time, had not been living in the city. And about a year after moving here, I started my first company. When I started my first startup, I did not even know that there was a startup community, which is shocking because I lived in Newton, which isn't that far away. And it's not like I wasn't Googling and it's not like I wasn't looking for it. It just wasn't very apparent. And I'm like 100% sure there's at least one person in this room right now who has probably been through that. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is like, Boston is an incredible place to build a company, but if you're not in the community and if you don't know somebody who can help you get into the community, it's really, really hard. The one thing that helped me was joining Twitter. Twitter is kind of going downhill lately, so I'm joining me for that. But I really didn't find the Boston startup community until I joined Twitter, and I was like, oh, there are people building startups who are willing to help me. Yeah, I don't know. That's just kind of my experience, but I think it's getting better. So.
Third perspective.
Go for it.
Yeah. So I've been living in the Boston area since 2005, give or take some. And I was in a different career. I went to school for music. I graduated and realized there was no jobs in music. So I ended up in education and then higher education. And then at some point I just decided, screw this, I want to do something fun. So I tried to find the startup ecosystem. And yeah, it was hard to know where to start. It was hard to figure out what events should I be going to? Is that how you find people? Do you make a persona on LinkedIn and sell yourself and people intro you? Like, I didn't know that either. And it did take some time to try and break in and build some of those relationships. But looking back, it wasn't as though it was gate kept. I just didn't know where to click in. And things that, like a venture cafe on Thursdays, is a great place to click in because it's regular, recurring, no entry fee, free drinks, and a lot of people who are willing to come and talk to you. And finding those types of kind of permeable areas, I think was key for me to find my way into the real ecosystem. And I think that's also part of the magic is that once it's easy to get in. You're not going to be like pushed out because you're not a 3-time serial founder that started your first startup when you're in college. Like there's not that ego keeping you out. But there is probably an access of finding where. It's probably one of the biggest challenges, in my opinion.
I think everyone can hear me okay, right? Okay, cool. I think that is a struggle. I feel like I'm right in the middle of all of this spectrum here too. I moved to Boston 4 years ago, but started at MassChallenge around the same time that I had moved. So, you know, it is knowing where and how, and actually I direct a lot of people to Startup Boston's website because there's a list of events, there's a list of resources, some actually really great articles too that I've been diving into even more recently about what does it mean to be in clean tech or climate tech in Boston, or how to connect with investors, and really going to events that are geared towards deal flow or towards co-founder matching. Now I'm speaking for you, but I think that there are so many great resources, and one of the ways that I actually got plugged in really early on too was signing up for newsletters. Now I have to funnel them all into a folder so I can read them all at once, but it was a great way for me to kind of find out what's happening in the ecosystem. Boston is still one of my favorite newsletters because I get a great breakdown. I see who is making big plays in the community, what events are coming up, and going and really reading and diving into what that looks like. Does anyone else have any other suggestions of resources that really helped them get plugged into this community?
I had a professional crush on someone for a while, and I finally channeled up the gumption to LinkedIn friend request and say, hey, I think you're really cool. You're doing cool stuff out there. And so that's how I met someone by the name of Jen Paxton, who is fantastic. She's like one of those super connectors. You just find these super connectors, and she was so nice and so easy to talk to and introduced me to other networking groups. And then she ended up getting my partner her first job in tech sales and has just been an ally. And I think you find these super connectors, just reach out to them and see if you can get some time.
I also think just showing up does wonders. It takes a lot of courage, especially if you're not used to networking or if you're not an extrovert or a very social person, but just show up and if you don't know somebody, just can I join a conversation? Hi, my name is so-and-so, blah, blah, blah. We all obviously do a ton of events, but there's also, other groups like Capital Z, MassChallenge, District Hall, Innovation Studio, they do a ton. Yeah, there are a lot of people here doing really great things to try and make it easier to get into this ecosystem, because once you're in, it's easy. Everybody is willing to help you and such. But yeah, I would just say showing up is the number one thing.
That's half the battle.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say to Madison's point about newsletters, there's something nice about that because it's content that you can digest at your own pace and you can sort of cherry pick what pertains to you. So if anybody wants a list, let me know, because I frequently send people when I get emails, they're like, how do I find out? I'm like, I've got you. Don't worry. We've done the hard work. Don't waste your time. So totally happy to do that. But I think, to Kylie's point, there are a lot of events, and although sometimes it can be a struggle and it's intimidating to sometimes walk into a room and not know anyone, I think it's important to realize, it's really easy to go up to the conversation from your own perspective and what will I add? Should I rehearse what I'm going to say? What's the most impressive thing about me or what I'm working on? But just remember that everyone in that room has been in your position at one point. They've been the person in that room who didn't know anyone. So I think that there's something very human that's happening of I've been you before, come on in, let's have a chat. So it's very easy to build things up in your head as maybe more than they are at the end of the day. So just walk in and realize, this is an incredibly collaborative, incredibly helpful ecosystem of people. And even if your intro line is, I don't know anyone else in this room and I'm really nervous. Anybody else been there? Someone would be like, it was me last week. I went to this event, I did, and then you're off to the races. So just remember that everybody here is absolutely willing to help and has 100% of interest.
Once you take that first step too of going to the event, going up to one person, and you can even ask that person too, do you know if there's anyone else in this room that I should go and talk to based on our conversation? And they might be a super connector, and might be able to introduce you to someone within that, because if Boston community, our little village here is anything, it's really well connected, and this willingness to want to help and willingness to want to make introductions where possible. I know even just anecdotally from us four sitting up here, we share resources amongst each other all the time. We send referrals to each other. We'll say, hey, I met this person. I think they may be really great for Venture Lane's program, and that's coming up soon, or doing referrals. And so it could be hard sometimes navigating that. So finding someone who's been through that or might be able to point you in the right direction could be really useful. And most of us are happy to do it right then and there at the event itself. But one thing that we actually had chatted about earlier too was there are a lot of resources and a lot of things that are available to founders. And it's walking this really fine line between finding the right resources at the right time and for the right audience. And we even chatted too about how do we make sure that our resources aren't getting siloed and that there's equitable access across the landscape to these resources. I know at MassChallenge, we try to do a lot of public and private events so that there are different things tailored towards different people, and trying to structure some conversations more industry specific or more, I guess, even roundtable conversations, more intimate discussions. But do you all have any recommendations? I know, Rachel, we chatted about this too, about how do we keep those resources industry specific or identity specific while also not siloing them? What are your thoughts on how we can collectively share that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess to boil it down to one statement, my hope in what I do day to day in this ecosystem as a whole is that if anyone comes for help to any one of us, to any resource in the city, that they're never met with a closed door. And that is something that is just like inherently incredibly important to me, because I talk about this a lot with a lot of my close friends. It really intrinsically bothers me that things aren't always fair. Like, I want everyone to have the same shot. And unfortunately, that's not the world that we live in at this point. It's the world that I hope we grow into. But I think there are little things that we can do day to day, and whether it be resource sharing amongst the folks within your own community, however you define that, that can be incredible. And I think organizationally and structurally, a lot of what we need to do is realize, a rising tide lifts all boats. And although organizations, have their own thing, want to be successful, whatever that looks like, it doesn't need to be this competitive atmosphere where we're excluding one another, siloing resources, keeping things behind closed doors. Because the fact of the matter is, like, I'll use VentureLane as an example, we specialize in early stage SaaS B2B tech. That is not everyone. Your B2C people, if they come to us, we're not the right people. And that's not because we don't want to help. That just means we know what we're good at, we know what we're not good at. But my hope is when you come to us, maybe with a question, it's not, oh, sorry, that's not what we do. And that's the end of the conversation. It's, maybe we're not the right people for it, because it's also about adding impact and adding value. And we want to see you succeed. We want to see you get those questions answered. But okay, who in my Rolodex do I know that would be a fantastic person to introduce you to? And always making that next step, going that extra mile to make sure that no one is sort of left still wondering, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to build past this point. So my goal is always to make sure, I think we can do it on an individual level, but also on an institutional and structural level. We need to be very honest about where are the resources that we have, what are the gaps, taking the time to educate ourselves on who can fill those gaps, and then proactively reaching out. And I think it's sort of a pattern of behavior. Once you start to flex that muscle over and over, it becomes so much more natural. And in the end, it becomes this collaborative environment. Like Dan and I, we're both volunteers for Startup Boston. We both have things that we do during the day, but we both came together in that. So there's actually a lot of cross promotion that does happen. I almost think it just needs to happen a little bit more publicly, because it's not about one organization winning, it's about Boston winning. And that's how we do that, in my opinion.
I 100% agree that it needs to be done more publicly. I think that is the number one reason that a lot of founders here find Boston to be so difficult to break into or exclusive. My dream for InnoCrew is that we will be the onboard to early stage founders trying to get onboarded into the ecosystem. And one of the ways that I've been thinking about doing this is by creating like a guide for early stage startup founders. The problem with that is it takes a lot of work, obviously, and it's a very labor intensive take on to keep it relevant. And so I'm hoping that organizations like Startup Boston and VentureLane and MassChallenge, we will all come together to hopefully make this a thing in the future, but I don't think that it exists publicly at this point. So like Rachel said, like we need to publicly acknowledge that there are gaps and that we're all working to improve it. And so I don't mean to be like the Debbie Downer of the conversation, but as a founder, like I've been there, it's really, really hard to weed through, several different websites and newsletters. And so if we had one single source, that would be amazing.
Third perspective, there's almost too much information. So my pedigree, my background is learning and development. So I think about how people learn, how people grow. I love failure. I could talk all day about failure. And I think that in today's society, both in Boston, but also at large, is that hustle culture mentality of you have to know everything, do everything, collect every resource, and it has to be perfect, puts a big damper on being public, on being out there, on sharing your crazy, wacky idea, because it's not good enough, because someone else has this most Instagrammable, beautiful, like social media feed of all their, trials and tribulations, and there's actually a full team of like content writers behind that, putting that image out. I think if you're passionate about something, you don't have to do it 1,000%. Do it 5%, and just go out, go talk to some people, show up to an event, say, I got this wacky idea today, I'm gonna try this thing out, and make something. Put it out there, and don't try and hold yourself to a perfect standard, because that's how things don't happen. There's communities here that are so eager to see what kind of 5% wacky idea you've got, so come out and bring it.
You heard him, bring it. This might still be dead.
Oh, I got it. Look at that. It might die on me soon. I know we should probably open up for questions from the audience here soon, but I did want to talk real quickly before we do just about the value of community. Because I think we've talked a lot about what is community, what does it look like here in Boston, how do we do it from our own organizations and across the landscape, but recently I've personally been thinking a lot about why do we need community, what does that look like, what is the importance of it, and actually my team right now is reading a really great book called The Business of Belonging, and it's a lot about how being part of a community is translating into so many aspects of your business. So even as a founder, when you think about, oh, I need to be part of the Boston community so I can meet other founders and investors, that is important, but there's also the aspect of your community and who are your customers and how are you reaching them, and this other extra element of what community means as being a part of it and also creating and curating it. And I'm curious if you all have any perspectives on that. And maybe this is just my selfish curiosity here, but Dan, you look really eager. Do you have thoughts?
I am all about this because I think that community building for your own self does not have to be a purely professional thing. People build communities for emotional support. People build communities for lead gen. People build communities because it's fun. And you want to find a significant other, go find a community of like-minded people who like dirt biking, through the streets of Boston. I don't know. Like all these different communities add value to you and you add value to it. And if you need encouragement, there's a community that needs you to show up and bring your little extra special 5% wacky. And so I think that the value is both to you in so many sectors of your life. And you could build that in so many different capacities, and you will grow as a person. If you're put in uncomfortable places that you have to be challenged and build a new relationship with someone who's different from you, and you learn from them and they learn from you, and it lifts all boats. So yeah, I could wax poetic about this all day.
I know there are a lot of founders in this room. I think the majority are founders. Like I said earlier, when I first started my startup journey, I did not have a community. And that was really hard on me mentally. And then I started my second startup a few years later, and I had community, and it was a much more positive journey. So I cannot emphasize enough, I think especially if regarding your mental health and just overall well-being as a human, being around other people and surrounding yourself with people who are going through similar things while you're building a company is critical. And it will make your journey a lot easier, a lot more positive. You will not be crying. Well, you might be crying sometimes, but you probably won't cry as much when you can, call somebody when you need a helping hand.
Can I piggyback on that and say the community can be like two other people?
100%.
It does not need to be an assembled squadron. It does not need to be a Justice League. I love the concept of accountability buddies. I talk about accountability buddies all the time. I form accountability buddy relationships with people. I say, do you want to be my accountability buddy? And they're like, oh my gosh, he asked me. And I'm like, yes. And those natural, intimate relationships are so powerful. And it just starts with asking someone.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, I would say probably all of you can testify to hearing me say this before, but I also think it's very important to remember that we're people first before whatever you're doing professionally. And I'm pretty sure I said to every single one of you before, like the least interesting thing about you is what your job title is. And I think that that's sometimes like hard for people to hear, because especially as founders, so much of your identity and your passion can be wrapped up in what you're doing. And it's difficult to sometimes divorce those two concepts of that can be true and you still need to make sure you're okay at the end of the day. And that's something that I constantly try to remind people, because it's like, you know what? At the end of the day, your business is your business. You're the person that has to live inside your head all day long. So trying to make sure that you're right with yourself, trying to make sure that you are accountable to the people around you and vice versa. And to Dan's point, we use words like community, build, manage, and it sounds like this kind of like very structured process and like there's a step-by-step. If you meet one other person here tonight, you built a community. And I think it's really easy to look at, like, my role is community manager. I have a title that, would seem, okay, you do this, this, and this very programmatically. And yes, there's an element of that. But at the end of the day, the things that I value most are the interpersonal relationships I have. And what I will take away from this experience and this role, wherever I go in life, is not, well, I built a community from this metric to this metric, and these many people joined, and we had these many events. I'm not gonna remember any of that. I'm gonna remember the people I built along the way and those interpersonal interactions that we had. So I would say, don't take that human element of it out. Like having transactional relationships sometimes happens in business, but it shouldn't be what every single interaction is. And if you feel that you're in a lot of those, maybe that's a sign to go to events that have, a thesis that resonates with who you are and what you like to do, or just try to find those folks that really connect with you and not necessarily your job title is the first thing. I think that that's so important. So many lifelong friendships come from that. And I also think that you become a better professional when you do that, because especially for a lot of founders, you guys are probably your biggest salespeople in your company at this point in time. So being able to connect on that human level and really understand where people are coming from, the sort of like net positive effects of that on everything else you do will move mountains.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it also takes time. Kylie moved here 7 years ago.
7 years ago. Also, just want to say, I went to my first startup networking event maybe 6 years ago. I attempted to talk to 3 people and cried in the bathroom the rest of the event because I was so nervous. And now I go to events and I know the majority of the people there. So it does get better. If that's you right now, just keep doing it.
The more you do it, the more it starts to feel natural and you start to see the same faces. And I keep joking, I'm like, yeah, I'm just gonna go hang out with friends. Oh yeah, that's right, it is a networking event. But you get to know these people, but that takes time. I've been here for 4 years and it's just started to feel like that sense of community, at least for me personally too. So be kind to yourselves as you're building your community and seeing what that looks like for you. We've heard so many different versions and so many different journeys of what community means to different people. And it does take a village. It takes all different organizations in this community of support and meeting different people and engaging with them, learning about them as individuals and also about their business and how you can help them and how they might be able to help you. And you never know, someone sitting next to you could be your next co-founder. They could be your next investor 5 years down the line. They might know someone at some big corporation that might be your first customer. So lean on your community, be a part of the community, and it's going to take you a long way.
My hack when I walked into rooms and didn't know anyone was I would walk up to someone that I knew I had never met, and I would walk up with a big smile on my face and go, "It's so good to see you again." Because nobody wants to be the person that doesn't remember, and then you're automatically off to a good conversation. They're like, "It's good to see you too," and then you just keep talking, and then they walk away and they're like, "How do I know that person?" And you find out everything about them. And it's a great way. If you walk in with confidence, nobody will question it.
Or ladder.
Tried and true. Tried and true.
I need my food. Oh, now it's time again. Probably for good reason. Well, what questions do you all have for us? I know we've got people virtually, we've got people in person. Yeah.
Question here. It's just wonderful to see 4 of you leaders of your respective communities come together, share your thoughts, and also just tremendous amount of collaboration among 4 of you as leaders of your respective community. Just wonderful. Rachel, by the way, you do have wonderful memory. We met once, and a few months later, you said, "Hi, Tony." So my question is, it seems the most difficult problem to solve for a community, if we sort of put all of these communities together, is oftentimes you have these serendipitous meetings that are very fruitful, but most of the time not. How can you, as leaders of your respective communities, help members to, I wouldn't want to say engineer these very fruitful, productive, serendipitous introductions, because people need to meet people that they want to sort of would have a closer relationship with, so it's helpful to their business. How do you solve that problem as community leaders?
So I got to help organize an event last week for Startup Boston called Co-Founder Matching. We run it every quarter. And the goal is that co-founders meet and they match. And then they start startups and they make $1 bazillion. Great. And so that was the design problem. How do we turn a co-founder matching event into something that has more serendipitous opportunities? And knowing that a lot of people coming into co-founder matching, they don't necessarily have a lot of legacy, maybe we don't know them, there's not a lot of qualifying criteria, we can't match make them. That's a different type of event. But what we can do is give them more at-bats. So what I mean by at-bats is more events that they show up to, more things that you do, the more connections to have. And so the solve that we attempted at co-founder matching a week and a half ago, was I just randomly said, there's 5 people that you should meet. Here's their names, here's a little bit about them. I don't know if they're good for you or not, but that's your quest. And now they've got 5 names that they know they can walk in, and if they see the name badge and say, you're on my quest, let's how to start a conversation. And if I can engineer 5 more at-bats than what they would have done naturally, then that's my success.
At InnoCrew, I do not necessarily curate the guest list of my events, but I do try to be intentional about, making sure that there are 2 to 3 people who are in similar industries or in similar stages of their journey, so that I can be like, oh, like this might be a good person for you to talk to. So that's what I have been doing, but I am very, very chill about it. Like, I'm just like, come hang out. and it always works. Everybody's like, this is the best group ever. Like, I met so many amazing people who can help me. And so I don't know, I feel like don't put too much thought into it, but also try to be somewhat intentional. I think there has to be a balance for sure.
Yeah, and I think my take on that would be just to kind of circle back to something I said prior, was just that human element, the human connection. You would be surprised if you really think back on some of the conversations you had, how open and honest people are about what they need and where they're at. And when you're having those conversations, again, not with any sort of business agenda, you learn a lot about people along the way. If you're listening to folks intentionally, they might say, oh, I had a really tough weekend, like this happened with my business, and because of that, whatever else. And then they just say it in passing, let it go. They're not proactively asking for help, but you say, oh, I know someone who might be able to help with that. And I think that can be done in big and small scales. I know for a lot of us, because our role is largely in community, we have kind of like this Rolodex of people that we try to keep tabs on and figuring out who can plug in, wherever. So that's helpful, but you don't have to have hundreds of people. It can be one other person that you're like, oh, I actually heard someone else recently talking about that, and I'm not sure, but would you be open to an introduction? And I think sometimes just being very, very present in those moments, not planning what you're saying, not figuring out what does this person want from me, looking them in the eye and listening and actually hearing what they're telling you goes such a long way, in my opinion. And those are, in terms of the introductions I've made, those are the ones that go the farthest. It's the ones where you've had that human connection first, and then you're able to say, we talked about this, and this, and I remember you saying that. For that reason, I want you to talk to this person. And maybe before you make that email introduction or whatever it is, you already talked to the person you're going to intro them to. Say, I had a conversation with this person. This is the problem that they're facing. I think you could be fantastic. So that way everybody has a little bit of context going in, because I think another thing is you never want to waste anyone's time. Like, time is a precious asset. When you're able to kind of like self-correct and make those meaningful introductions, it benefits everyone in the long run. And I think just don't lose sight of that human element of things.
Yeah, I'd agree. And I think from the community organizer perspective too, the better that I get to know other organizers, the better I get to know Rachel, the more that I'm able to talk with entrepreneurs in the MassChallenge program and help them understand, yes, you might be a really good fit for VentureLane. Or you know what, maybe you're not a good fit for VentureLane, but you might be a good fit for this other organization, and funneling them to the resources that they are going to really succeed with, rather than wasting anyone's time, because I know time is precious. It's precious for entrepreneurs, it's precious for anyone. So funneling the right resources, because I've taken the time to understand what those resources are and who the best connections might be. I think that's one way that I personally challenge myself to be the best community organizer that I can be, to help funnel through all the noise and all the different events and resources available. So like I said, I just get to make friends all the time. They're really awesome people. Other questions? Do we have any virtual ones? Jason?
No, just a lot of interest around that you don't need to be on the Justice League. So, and yeah, some of the other comments are highlighted too on, the interpersonal relations that Rachel shared, and yeah, some of the other aspects. But yeah,
Okay. Thank you so much. And it's related to me a lot about I moved to Boston exactly the same time as you, September 2021. But I moved to San Francisco and just came back here.
Welcome back.
Yeah, I'm getting here because I love Boston, and we cannot find this kind of community anywhere else. Boston is Boston. Yeah, but the thing that the thing that I'm curious is about the form of community is kind of be shift from in person to be hybrid, and it's probably be virtual in the future, especially for metaverse or something like that. So as a community leader, what the tip for new entry if we have to be build the human connection in virtual community?
I think the best organizations that are genuinely trying to build community for people are doing hybrid, or I'm doing 100% in person, but I have my reasons. And I think for example, Startup Boston was a great hybrid program. You guys did it last year. I'm assuming you're doing it again this year. And so I would be shocked if communities were 100%, all communities were 100% in person. So that's not a concern of mine, at least.
And I think, so we have a virtual community that we power through the Slack, and total transparency, it's difficult to replicate that in-person experience virtually because we're so kind of socialized in such a pattern of habit to we use social media and we type, and I feel every layer of community just feels very social media-esque, and that definitely serves its purpose. But it's difficult. And I would say one of the things that we do, for any of you that have been to the physical space that VentureLane has, you've seen this, we actually have a physical pillar in our space that has a bell on it. And anytime our companies have any sort of success, if they raise a round, they launch a product feature, we have people that have gotten married, that got their US citizenship, that had a baby, whatever it might be, we have a Sharpie that is Velcro to that pillar, people write it down, and then they ring the bell, kind of like selling Sunset a little bit. And the bell is so loud that everybody in the office hears it. And then people rush out and celebrate those wins with them. Because we believe in a culture of celebrating success. And that was something that all of our space members love it so much, we love it so much, but we were how do we make sure that everyone that's kind of in our Slack community gets a piece of that? So we have it called VL Bell Rings channel. And we have 2,000 folks that every time there's a win, they're popping that in there. People are reacting with emojis, they're commenting on it. And it's just this idea, something that I think so often we kind of just expect that celebration to occur in person, or oh, I'll congratulate them when I see them. But just all of these people, even some that they don't even know, just piling on and sharing in that success. That's one way that we try to kind of add that element. And then also recognizing the fact that a lot of communication that we all do is through a virtual medium, whether we're texting one another, emailing. So a lot of that happens naturally. And a lot of those times, think about your text conversations with your best friends. Those are very personal conversations. So it's not impossible. I just think you have to approach it from sort of a position or a lens of real intentionality and understanding what are those things that light you up inside, and how do you add that with whatever community you're building or serving.
I would say for this hybrid world, kind of going off of what Rachel was saying, it's really important that you're balancing both your business and your personal persona, because that's something you get really naturally in person that doesn't always translate, at least in my opinion, virtually. You're on a Zoom call, if it's random breakout rooms, you've got a topic, you have something you're there to talk about, you're there to pitch your startup. But finding other virtual channels, if you are in the virtual space more than the in-person, where you can really express who you are, what are some things that you like to do as hobbies, how can you create your sense of community with people on a personal note as well, because I think that's what gets missed. I'm a big fan of a good balance of both in-person and virtual, but it's hard to do both of that, but it's also, I don't think we can go back to 100% in person anymore, even from an equity standpoint. a little after 6 on a Tuesday, people who have families at home with young kids, it's really difficult for them to come all the way into Seaport, maybe from a suburb or even within Boston, when they have other responsibilities. So from both people who are located in the city but have other commitments, having the virtual option makes our community so much more accessible across different scenarios for founders and for just general community members who want to support those founders. So I think it is a balance. I don't think we've nailed it yet. I think we're working on it. It's trial and error. It's all, I think, new for all of us, but providing the options, I think, is still really important.
Don't be afraid to ask people what they want out of that. Like, you don't have to brainchild all these ideas. Go out to your community and say, what are you loving? What do you want to be different? And some of the best ideas that we get are totally crowdsourced. And I'm like, yeah, we will be doing that. Thank you so much. That sounds great.
Yeah, thank you all for the insights. And I have a question about the community standards, especially in regards to the human connection that we want to keep in communities as they grow. Sometimes it's difficult to break into a room of like 100 people who actually seem to know each other and you are the only stranger. And I'm curious how, when you are actually growing your communities, how do you make sure that this human element is not lost? And if you recommend someone to actually like maybe start with smaller groups and trying to get to know people instead of going to bigger groups, which seem to be well connected, but also like more kind of stronger connection inside than people outside people coming in.
So if I understand the question correctly, kind of how do you architect the community for people in the right sizes, both in person and make sure they have access to building those connections? Is that the question?
Especially the human element
Especially if there's a human element to it. So my answer to that is that there's an art and a science to community building. You can literally, I don't know if there's degrees yet in colleges, universities, but you can get professionally trained on how to curate communities in person and virtually. And so there is a corpus of knowledge out there that you can go out and learn. You can go to a conference and learn how community builders build community. So there's certainly a science to it, but there's also an art. And so depending on the topic, depending on the industry, depending on the location, depending on the time of day, you may get a very different audience of people. And so what they need may differ than the audience of people 5 hours later. So you do start to feel the ebb and flow of those communities. And when you do that, you start to understand through time, because it does take time, what success looks like in terms of that community experience. And sometimes it's intentional programming, like co-founder matching, here's your find your five. Maybe it's more casual, come hang out, we're gonna eat a meal and we're gonna have a really decent conversation. And you start to figure out who gets attracted to that, what do they need, what are they maybe unsure about, and how can you serve that up in a way that's friendly, not threatening, but maybe challenges them to move outside of their comfort zone. And so small groups are always safe because you can actually read the room a lot easier than 100 people. But over time, you will start to read, oh, this group of people who shows up to my events, this is what they like, this is what they don't like, this is what's worked in the past, and here's the crazy idea that we'll try to get them to engage.
Yeah, I could just use our VentureLane space as an example, because when I was interviewing for VentureLane, my research process, I wanted to know more about the size of the community, why certain decisions were made, and this is going to sound like a shocking statement to a bunch of startup founders, but our physical model of VentureLane is not scalable by design. Which sounds weird to say, but the idea is there's a psychological principle that when you walk into a room, the human brain is only able to recognize about 150 faces. And that is the core of why we selected the footprint that we did for VentureLane. It's because it's big enough that, it's a large enough group of people. There's a lot of diversity in every sense of the word. And that's exciting. There's always newness. There's a lot of awesome conversations that can happen. But it's small enough that you will recognize the people that you see every single day. And even if you haven't met them, you're going to be like, you know what, that guy always gets coffee at the same time that I do. I don't know who it is, but I recognize him. And that was a very intentional choice, because for the gentleman that founded VentureLane, Christian Magel, that was something that he really wanted. He wanted people to feel like they had like a home and a safe space, and that like this was their go-to place to have that feeling of belonging. And that's something where you do kind of have to straddle that line when it comes to a lot of decisions you're making, be it in person or virtually. I know our Slack community is 2,000 people. That's a lot of people. I'm also in Slack communities that are like 25,000 people. And that's sort of the thing where it's almost so big, and that's exciting that many people want to participate. I cannot keep up with the content with 25,000 people. So there's certain decisions that you want to make relative to what you're building, what the needs are of the people that are in your community, and especially if your role in community is going to be to oversee it, it needs to be something that's manageable to a certain extent. So I think you really need to be honest with yourself and figure out what resonates with you and sort of the group of folks that you're working with. But I do think that there is merit to keeping it digestible, because those serendipitous interactions that we talked about earlier, those happen when there's a big enough area to play, but a small enough area where everybody's kind of playing in the same field, if that makes sense.
We had a virtual question come in from Puck about how does the Boston startup community ensure that great ideas and world-changing ideas don't either die or move to other communities outside of Boston, and is that a priority?
It's definitely a priority for me. I started InnoCrew for a lot of reasons, but one of them is because I plan to stay in Boston, and I was thinking to myself, well, if I'm planning to stay here, I might as well invest in the community. And while I was thinking about that, I had a lot of friends who were telling me that they were leaving Boston because it wasn't a good place for them to raise post like Series B. And so I think it's a really great place for early stage founders, students especially, but there's a lot of work to be done in terms of the later stage. And so it's top of mind for me. I don't have all the answers, but to answer your question, Puck, I mean, I think it's just a matter of like continuing what we're doing and making a genuine effort to build the community up and get more visibility in Boston for sure.
I would love it if every startup wanted to start in Boston. Maybe they don't finish in Boston. That's okay. I mean, my idea is that community is not something that I have control over who stays and who goes, but I can have a control on their experience. So I can give them the best grade A experience, and that's my mission. That's my role here. That's what I can do. And I think that everyone who plays in this arena probably brings that idea and mentality to do the best that they can here. And sure, maybe you go to Silicon Valley to raise your Series F for your biotech, whatever. Fine, great. Say it started in Boston, and tell all the entrepreneurs out there, come on, move over here. It's a little bit cold in the winter, but we have a really warm community waiting for you.
I think we've seen several companies that are Boston born, raised, and continue to stay. And technically, HubSpot is across the way in Cambridge, but I've seen them. Whoop has been another big one. Ginkgo Bioworks was actually one of MassChallenge, actually was our first unicorn to come out of our program. And so I'd like to see more of it. I don't know that we will though, but it also takes, having those people who've been really successful in the ecosystem also come back and continue to engage in that ecosystem and be a part of it. And many of them do, which is great. I'd like to see more of it.
Wonder whether you could compare and contrast the community building here versus Silicon Valley. What do you see that things are done differently? Just curious.
From a founder perspective, I go to San Francisco about 1 to 2 times a year, and every single time I've gone to an event there, I've left with like 20 new friends. In Boston, I maybe leave with 1 or 2, like that, and I don't know what it is. Like I'm still trying to figure it out, but like I'll get invited to an event in San Francisco, super last minute, show up, everyone's just like super happy, friendly, and like that's not like it's not the case here, but it's just a slightly different vibe. Like it's very difficult to explain unless you've been in that room. But I don't know, just like my founder experience, like I said here, has been a little rocky, just in terms of like getting into the community. Now I'm in, like it's great. I have an incredible support system,
But I mean, going to San Francisco, not knowing a soul, and literally like being there for 24 hours and meeting 15, 20 new founders, and I'm like still in touch with to this day, like that.
That's in my experience. What'd you say?
Is it just more people?
Yeah, definitely more people, a lot more young people. Not that there aren't a ton of young founders here, but I mean, to Rachel's point, we are surrounded by so many incredible universities, and that's a great thing. I also think that it can be detrimental because a lot of the young people and the young builders here in Boston are siloed to their university. And it's very difficult to get them to leave university life because that's what they're comfortable with, that's convenient for them. Especially too, like there's not a university near the seaport. So for them to get here, like that's hard. Do you have a question about university stuff? Sorry.
Well, I mean, you mentioned Seaport.
Yeah.
I guess my question was more so about additional advice for communities of color, because we are in Seaport and I'm from Alabama. So, but everyone is really kind of siloed in their own specific areas, and knowing that it's really difficult for communities of color to break into the industry if we're talking about, village and community building. Did you have any additional advice or anything that your respective areas are doing to kind of outreach and not be in the Seaport area, which is kind of hard for other people to get to?
I'm going to hand it over to Rachel to talk about Startup Boston's programming goal. But before I do that, there are quite a few communities here that are specifically focused on BIPOC communities. I'm thinking right off the top of my head, the Roxbury Innovation Center. I think E4All. I think of Innovation Studio, even though they have a location here, they're also in Providence. They do a lot of cross-pollination. A lot of these organizations specifically are trying to build that type of access. And then you also have to think about where does the talent come from. So you have an organization like Hack Diversity, which is helping place entry-level tech talent. And so you want to build more representation throughout the ecosystem. You need these types of organizations that are really kind of pushing people out there and saying like, listen, there's an opportunity here. You can get engaged, it's there. There are grants from the state of Massachusetts and the city of Boston to help communities of color get started, help build businesses. There's the Main Streets organization, which is more focused on brick and mortar small business. So there are those resources out there, but it's just hard to find it in all the noise. There's all sorts of stuff.
And I think what Dan was alluding to, so Startup Boston as an organization, one of the reasons that I love it is it is very important to me that we all have equal access to opportunity. And I think one of the things that I loved about Startup Boston, there was a selfish component of, I don't know anyone here, and I need to meet people. And there was also this idea of, the more I researched it, I was like, you do a week full of 80 events, 250 speakers, tons of resources, and you don't charge for this? I was like, that's odd in a way that I like. So I wanted to learn more, and through volunteering last year, I was a track lead. So you're coming up with the events, you're sourcing the speakers, and one of the things that was just from day one, core to the Startup Boston ethos and something that we carry with us in everything that we do, is it needs to be a representative pool in every capacity. The speakers, the moderators, the attendees, we want this conference to look like the world that we live in. No two faces are the same, no two experiences are the same. Everyone deserves equal access. And that's something that last year our split was 50-50 between male and female speakers, and also in terms of racial diversity as well, which is amazing because that's statistically, that is so far ahead of so many other organizations, and not necessarily for lack of trying, but that was something I think that we were really proud of. And then my role this year is head of programming, and I was like, I want 80-20. We're doing it every single year, bigger and better. Why? Because I think a lot of times you hear, oh, it's so difficult. It's not. When you look around, there is talent everywhere. If you're not seeing it, you're not looking for it. And I think one of the things to kind of bring back a message that we had earlier is when you're doing these things, when you're highlighting these speakers, do it publicly. People need a platform, especially people who systemically have not been granted that before. That's a really hard barrier to break through. So shout out these people publicly. I'm a huge believer, the people you want to surround yourself are the people that name you in a room of opportunity. Find those people, celebrate yourself. Don't be afraid to sort of put out there everything that you're building and be proud of it because it's hard and you're doing it. And also realize, I'm gonna be very candid, Boston has a long way to go in terms of diversity. I'm not gonna mince words on it. We have so much more that we need to do, but it takes every single one of us to help further that. And that's not a quick fix, it's not an easy answer, but it's something that we can't just let fall by the wayside because there's so many incredible, talented, amazing individuals that don't have the platform that they deserve. And like, I think I can speak for all of us, we're not resting until that changes. And when it does change, we're still not resting.
Let's see if this works again.
And I think too, because specifically speaking to Seaport, MassChallenge started here, and there was nothing here at the time. And that was actually the reason why we started here, was that there was this vision for Seaport to be this innovation design district. That's why we moved it out to the innovation design building. But the reality was that that was 20 minutes further into Seaport, and it makes it really hard to get to. Even myself getting to work was difficult, especially when we're going in every day. And so, we go where the space is for MassChallenge, but we also want to recognize and be really equitable across the landscape. So we team up with a lot of other organizations. Roxbury Innovation Center was a great example too, where we've been participating at their events and made sure that MassChallenge is part of conversations and a visible part of the community, and that we're not only expecting people to come to us, but that we're also going to other people. I talk about this a lot, about community as a two-way street, and I really have embedded it into a lot of the work we do at MassChallenge of not expecting people to always come to us, but providing value to both ways, and not expecting people to always come here, not expecting people to always give back to MassChallenge if we're not doing the same. And so that, for me personally, has been a really big part of what it means to be part of a community and to be reaching everyone from all areas in Boston and surrounding areas of Boston and even beyond. MassChallenge is a global organization, and so when we talk about the hybrid events, it really isn't always equitable to just do an in-person activity because people who might not be able to make it there for various reasons, whether they're even on campus over at Madison, that's far away. It's hard to get into Boston from here unless there's a shuttle or a bus taking you in or the commuter rail. So identifying ways that programming can be either recorded or streamed live so that anyone anywhere can access it. And Jason, are we coming up on time? I'm sorry if I'm going over.
No, this is great. Yeah. If there's any last question you want to. Yeah, Tony, you want to wrap up?
I'm asking another question. You're all doing great things for building out Boston's ecosystem, the communities. If I were to ask you to picture forward 5 years from now, what do you think the Boston entrepreneur community will become because of your efforts that you're putting into this today and next year, year after?
Back to my earlier point, I see the universities becoming much more involved in the startup scene. That is something, like I said, doesn't happen that often now. I think every now and then there are some events that are focused specifically on student founders that are put on by people in the scene. But my hope is that will continue to improve, and we will work with the universities, and they will want to work with us, and we'll be able to get people familiar and integrated into the community, and hopefully they will want to stay here post graduation and build their companies.
I would say, similar to what I said before, I want this ecosystem to look like the rest of the world around us. I want it to be diverse. I want it to be equitable. There is a very real, palpable passion that I find in Boston, and it is my sincere hope that that never goes away. It's something that I really love. There's an ambition here and sort of this thirst to be able to go after something, which really lights me on fire. I'm not even building your company. I don't work for you, and I'm so invested in your success. So that's something that's really cool. I want, in a perfect world, I would love to see all of these micro communities kind of emerge over the years continuously and grow into bigger ones or stay small, whatever the case may be for whatever organization. And I think just making this a really collaborative community, because I think we all benefit from seeing the fruits of that collaboration in a very real, very immediate way every day. But maybe if you're working at home by yourself, you don't always get to see that. And I would hope that sort of as we grow and scale and evolve, new ideas, new industry, whatever comes to this area, and that it just becomes a place where it's not why does someone want to build in Boston? It's why wouldn't they? Like everything's here. This is the place to be. So it's my hope that through incremental changes, a lot of effort, a little bit of luck, that we get to that point.
5 years. So if someone is a senior in high school now and goes to a traditional 4-year institution, they will graduate and they will be in their first job. That is a place that a lot of innovation can happen to make that easier for that student to get engaged, for sure. But it's a really short time frame to really change the face of Boston. So instead, I'm going to turn it over to you and say, what are you going to do? And maybe I'll say this only, like, what are you going to do? We just articulated a problem. It's hard to find access. It's hard to get connected. There's people who are interested in getting access to a community, but it's not fixed. So what are you all going to do in the next 5 years to make that better?
My personal belief is that we need a platform, and I'm not talking my own book. That platform would enable each and every individual in this broad community to create their own customized communities. You give them the tools, then they can go out and curate their own communities exactly to their liking. So you have, instead of just a limited number of leaders building their respective communities, you have a lot of people building these little different communities. But then there's this platform that can bind them all together because they're all connected onto that platform. That's my belief.
Okay, let's make it happen.
As I said earlier, I think just showing up, like we all just need to show up. It's a collective effort if we actually want to see true change. And so if we all just contribute and show up and provide thoughts, you don't have to start a community to make a difference in the community, you know? Like you can just share your thoughts on what you think needs to be improved and how that can be improved. You don't necessarily need to be the executor, but just being vocal and open and honest about what you would like to see as well helps all of us to create the community that you want and that we want.
To piggyback on what could we do, I would like the idea of starting a community for myself that's not quite named startup, because startup conveys a certain group of people that are at the very beginning, and that can be off-putting in some way because I see that, and that's great, and I sort of feel like a startup, but maybe I'm moving up, you know, we're not quite at the beginning, and so I think that would be, I could think about the next 5 years, is to sort of target that group. Just a thought.
Yes, it's starting here.
It did, it started here. Well, I think you all showed up today. You showed up to a conversation about it takes a village, which means you are now part of that village. And it is all of us working together to create the sense of community, not only for ourselves, but for each other. And it's dead again. All right, so you now have 4 people up here that you can go up to at an event that you show up to, and you can say, hey, we met at the events. Who do you think I should talk to here? And we can make introductions, use us. Well, I guess I can only speak for myself, but knowing these folks, I think I could speak on their behalf to say, use us. See how we might be able to connect you. See how anyone sitting next to you right now might be able to connect you or find an event to go to. Maybe you go to another Startup Spring event this week and you say, hey, which ones are you going to? And make those connections, start building your community today, because we're all part of the same village. With that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, it was amazing insights from all the panelists. Yeah, great questions from everyone. And yeah, I kind of use this for the rest of the time here. Just get to know everybody that came out and, make this your community. And yeah, we're going to have everybody that's not in yet. We're going to make sure everybody is also invited. We have a Slack channel going for the startup spring events this week. I think there's about 150 people or so in there right now. So yeah, we'll make sure everybody that came out, both online and in person here, are included in that too. And then yeah, so we'll send out a wrap up email tonight or tomorrow morning. With also, you can go back and check out the recording from the events. And yeah, we'd love to see everybody at our next events. We have 2 events at Venture Cafe tomorrow, both the Startup Showcase and our demo day from our Prepare for VC Accelerator program. And yeah, just really appreciate everybody coming out and being part of this great startup community.
Thank you.
So, I think tomorrow or Thursday.